Imagine an ocean entirely dominated by a single, shadowy figure, a ruler so completely overpowered that its mere presence dictated the survival or the absolute extinction of everything around it. We're not talking about a movie monster here. This is the real, scientifically grounded story of an evolutionary ambition that drove a creature to the absolute physical limits of what biology can sustain. And as we'll see, it's also the story of the fatal vulnerabilities that brought the ocean's greatest dynasty crashing down.
But before we trace this epic history, let's address the elephant in the room, or, well, the giant shark in the room. It's that tantalizing question that completely dominates the internet. Is this prehistoric monster still surviving, just hidden away in the darkest, unexplored depths of the ocean? You know what I'm talking about. You've probably seen the viral videos or the sci-fi movies suggesting that a colossal, 50-foot shark is currently surviving on scraps at the bottom of the Mariana Trench, just waiting for its moment to rise again.
Well, the scientific answer to that is a definitive, absolute no. Think about it. If a massive warm-water transoceanic predator still existed today, we'd be seeing its bite marks on modern whales, and we would constantly be finding its freshly shed teeth washing up on our beaches. It is entirely extinct. But honestly, the real story of this creature's rise to power and its ultimate demise is far more captivating and frankly way more terrifying than any modern myth. The truth reveals an apex predator that engineered itself for absolute supremacy, only to be betrayed by the very planet it conquered.
For decades, we kind of had this animal completely wrong. Pop culture always pictured the Megalodon as this stout, bulky, just sort of scaled-up great white shark. But recent analyses of a really rare fossilized vertebral column found in Belgium have completely rewritten that image. By comparing the neurocranial and tail fin proportions across hundreds of living and extinct sharks, scientists figured out the Megalodon actually possessed a much more slender, elongated body. It wasn't some bulky, muscular brawler. Actually, it was a beautifully streamlined, highly efficient predator, biologically engineered to minimize drag in the water.
And this updated slender body model is a real game changer because it pushes the absolute maximum size limits of the shark way beyond what we previously estimated. Scientists now suggest this animal could have grown to a staggering length of 24.3 meters. That is nearly 80 feet long. To achieve this extreme level of gigantism, the Megalodon lineage, which is part of the extinct Otodontida family, had to undergo millions of years of evolutionary upgrades. It literally pushed past the normal biological size limits of any shark that doesn't just sit around eating plankton.
To put that colossal scale into perspective, an adult megalodon maxing out at that size would have weighed an estimated 94 metric tons. Imagine taking about half a dozen modern city buses and combining their weight into one sleek, flesh-tearing torpedo. That's what we're talking about here. At this size, it completely and utterly ruled its prehistoric domain. In fact, isotopic analyses, looking at the zinc and calcium preserved in its teeth, prove that the megalodon fed at a trophic level significantly higher than even today's great white shark. It was, without question, the undisputed king of the Miocene oceans. Now, as a transoceanic superpredator, the Megalodon wasn't just some heavy, sluggish coastal dweller waiting around in ambush. Not at all. With an estimated cruising speed of up to 3.5 kilometers per hour, it was an actively patrolling, highly efficient hunter. That slender body we talked about allowed it to maintain incredible hydrodynamic efficiency across vast oceanic distances. Its empire literally knew no borders. We know this because its teeth have been found on every single continent on Earth except for Antarctica.
And the sheer dominance of this biological empire? It was evident from literally day one of a megalodon's life. Based on the growth bands found in their vertebrae, researchers estimate that newborns measured up to 3.9 meters. That's nearly 13 feet long, the very moment they were born. How is that even possible? Well, they likely achieved this enormous birth size through intrauterine cannibalism, meaning they were actually feeding on unhatched eggs while still inside the womb. Because they were born so massively large and capable, they completely bypassed the need for a protected coastal nursery. They were instantly large enough to hunt marine mammals right out of the gate, facing almost zero risk of being hunted themselves.
Once fully grown, the Megalodon's hunting strategy was devastatingly brutal. Modern great whites typically ambush from below, right? They target the soft underbelly of their prey. The Megalodon didn't need to do that. It utilized its massive size, high-speed bursts, and uniquely serrated teeth to crush directly through the rib cages of large baleen whales. We actually have fossilized whale vertebrae from that era showing massive, deep compression fractures and fatal gashes. This proves the Megalodon would just smash straight into the most heavily armored parts of its prey, instantly puncturing the heart and lungs for a rapid, overwhelming kill.
But as history shows us time and time again,
Even the most dominant empires have a turning point. For the Megalodon, the beginning of the end wasn't a bigger predator. The end arrived slowly, as the planet itself turned against its greatest creation.
The collapse began with a massive environmental domino effect. As the Earth entered the Pliocene epoch, the global climate drastically shifted. The closing of the Central American Seaway stalled out the warm ocean currents that the Megalodon thrived in. Expanding polar ice caps caused sea levels to plummet, devastating those warm coastal environments. Because of this, up to a third of all large marine animals began to die out as the very base of the food chain collapsed. The world was freezing, and the warm water-dependent Megalodon was suddenly feeling the chill.
This climate shift triggered the direct collapse of the Megalodon's food supply. Its absolute favorite food source, those mid-sized baleen whales, completely vanished from the fossil record. The baleen whales that did manage to survive this extinction event adapted in a fascinating way. They grew much larger and migrated toward the newly freezing polar waters. But the Megalodon, restricted by its thermal physiology, it simply could not follow its prey into the ice. It hit a thermal wall. It was suddenly trapped in shrinking patches of warm seas, completely cut off from its primary source of food.
Starving and physically restricted, the giant faced a new, fatal threat: the rise of highly agile competitors. As the Megalodon struggled to maintain its enormous 94 metric ton body on a dwindling food supply, newly evolved ancestors of the great white shark entered the scene. These smaller, faster, and highly maneuverable predators were perfectly adapted to this newly changing world. They required far fewer calories to survive and could easily outmaneuver the lumbering Megalodon, basically stealing its dwindling food supply right out from under it.
And compounding this absolute tragedy for the Megalodon, the ancestors of modern orcas, killer whales, also emerged during this time. These early cetaceans were incredibly successful polar and subpolar predators. They began hunting in packs, utilizing advanced social dynamics to take over the very niches that the Megalodon could no longer physically reach. Between the freezing oceans, the disappearing prey, the agile great whites, and the highly intelligent orcas, the Megalodon was effectively locked out of the very oceanic food web it had once commanded.
By roughly 3.5 million years ago, this ecological squeege was complete. The greatest biological empire the oceans had ever known fell entirely to ruin. Today, there are no giant fins breaking the surface, no 50-foot shadows gliding through the deep. What remains are only the massive fossilized teeth scattered across the globe, and the scarred, crushed bones of the prehistoric whales it once hunted. Sometimes scientists even find the broken tips of Megalodon teeth still permanently embedded in those ancient bones. A haunting, beautiful snapshot of a long-lost reign.
It leaves us with a truly chilling realization about the fragility of absolute dominance. Think about it. If an animal perfectly engineered for supremacy, a 94-ton transoceanic superpredator, could be utterly erased by a shifting climate and changing food webs, how secure is the reign of today's apex predators? What does that mean for the delicate balance of our oceans right now? It is a stark reminder that no empire lasts forever. If you want to witness more stories of the rise and fall of power, subscribe and follow to Empire Snapshots.